The Stations of the Cross is a practice that was developed in the earliest days of the Christian faith. It began as pilgrims made their way to Jerusalem and attempted to trace the path to the cross. Over time, this practice made its way into Europe and Africa, Asia, and the Americas, and developed in such a way that people could follow that path without physically being present in Jerusalem. For this video presentation of the Stations of the Cross, we have attempted to give you a virtual experience. You may watch this video in one continuous sitting, or you may pause it along the way to reflect and to pray at individual stations.
Station 1. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Matthew 26, 36 through 44. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took along Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to feel sorrow and distress. Then he said to them, "My soul is sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and keep watch with me." He advanced a little and fell prostrate in prayer, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet, not as I will, but as you will." When he returned to his disciples, he found them asleep. He said to Peter, "So you could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not undergo the test. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." The disciples followed Jesus to the garden that night. Yet, even they could not go full way with him. Jesus had to make this part of the journey alone, without the support and encouragement of his followers. As Jesus prayed, he sought comfort from his heavenly Father. For a few hours, Jesus would be alone with God. Reflect on what it means for us to be alone with God. The chalice symbolizes the sorrow and pain that Jesus experienced. It also reminds us that Jesus had a choice to make. He could have turned back from his most important mission, leaving us to face the full consequences of sin and death. Or he could pursue the will of God. The choice was his to make. We should not imagine that it was an easy choice. He alone faced Golgotha. He alone could face the full impact of the world's sin. He alone could exhaust the powers of darkness, disarming them and setting the world free from their tyranny.
Station 2. Jesus, betrayed by Judas, is arrested. Jesus celebrated the Passover with his most devoted followers. They accompanied Jesus to the garden. By the end of the night, one would betray him, and the rest would abandon him. Mark 14, 43 through 50. Just as Jesus was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Peter was a passionate man who often acted before thinking. Like the other disciples, Peter probably felt anger, fear, and maybe some hatred as he saw the men who came to arrest Jesus. That night, as an act of loyalty to Jesus, Peter used his sword to strike one of those men. We read, "The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear." "Am I leading a rebellion," said Jesus, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled." Then everyone deserted him and fled. In the heat of the moment, some of these followers of Jesus were willing to take up arms for him. All of that quickly changed. Their courage disappeared. These same disciples, who should have stayed with their master, turned and fled, abandoning Jesus in his most desperate hour. By the end of the night, no one stood with Jesus.
Station 3. Jesus is condemned by the Sanhedrin. Luke 22:66-71. When the day came, the council of elders of the people met, both chief priests and scribes, and they brought him before their Sanhedrin. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." But he replied to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I question, you will not respond. But from this time on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." They all asked, "Are you the Son of God?" He replied to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further need have we for testimony? We have heard it from his own mouth." The gavel reminds us of decisions made by the Sanhedrin. They gathered to decide Jesus' fate. Many of them had decided on Jesus' guilt before the meeting began.
Station 4. Jesus is denied by Peter. Look at the pain and sorrow depicted by the artist of this painting. Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends, had promised to be faithful to Jesus and to stay with him no matter what happened. The arrest of Jesus tested that resolve. Matthew 26:69-75. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. One of the maids came over to him and said, "You too were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it in front of everyone, saying, "I do not know what you are talking about." As he went out to the gate, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus the Nazarene." Again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." A little later, the bystanders came over and said to Peter, "Surely you too were one of them. Even your speech gives you away." At that, he began to curse and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word that Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." He went out and began to weep bitterly.
Station 5. Jesus is judged by Pilate. Pontius Pilate was the highest-ranking government official in the land. He stood above the crowd, looking down on the faces of the people. These people wondered what sentence Pilate would pronounce upon Jesus. Mark 15:1-5. The chief priests were with the elders and the scribes, that is, the whole Sanhedrin, held a council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate questioned him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He said to him in reply, "You say so." The chief priests accused him of many things. Again, Pilate questioned him, "Have you no answer? See how many things they accuse you of?" Jesus gave him no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. When Pilate washed his hands, he was indicating that he was not responsible for what was about to happen. Yet nothing could have been further from the truth. Pilate had the final say in all legal matters. He answered to no one but the emperor. Yet he abdicated his responsibility and pretended to have nothing to do with the outcome of Jesus' trial. Matthew 27:24. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." Mark 15:15. Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas and handed Jesus over to be crucified.
Station 6. Jesus is scourged and crowned with thorns. Look at the whip intertwined with the crown of thorns. These represent the brutal acts of violence used against Jesus. John 19:1-3. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him scourged, and the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and placed it on his head, and clothed him in a purple cloak, and they came to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him repeatedly. Station 7. Jesus bears the cross. John 19:6 and 15 through 17. When the chief priests and the guards saw Jesus, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him." They cried out, "Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, in Hebrew, Golgotha. Station 8. Jesus is helped by Simon the Cyrenian to carry the cross. Mark 15:21. They pressed into service a passerby, Simon, a Cyrenian, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross.
Station 9. Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. These are members of our church from another century. Though they lived in another time, we have much in common with them. They shared our human sense of wonder, hope, and creativity. They also shared in all our human frailties and faults. They, and we, are not much different from the crowds of people that followed Jesus. Time, culture, and geography separate us from them, but we share a common humanity. Luke 23:27 through 31. A large crowd of people followed Jesus, including many women who mourned and lamented him. Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep instead for yourselves and for your children, for indeed the days are coming when people will say, 'Blessed are the barren, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' At that time people will say to the mountains, 'Fall upon us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if these things are done when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?"
Station 10. Jesus is crucified. Luke 23:33-34. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him and the criminals there, one on his right, the other on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do."
Station 11. Jesus promises his kingdom to the good thief. Luke 23:39 through 43. Now one of the criminals hanging there reviled Jesus, saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." The other, however, rebuking him, said in reply, "Have you no fear of God? For you are subject to the same condemnation. And indeed, we have been condemned justly, for the sentence we received corresponds to our crimes, but this man has done nothing criminal." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Jesus was not the first or last Jewish man to be crucified by the Romans. Rome used crucifixion to shock rebellious people into obedience. The cross was a powerful reminder that Rome held Jerusalem and all its territories with an iron fist. Some of the men who were crucified were insurgents, terrorists, or criminals. Others were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Roman leaders had the authority to round up and punish anyone they chose.
Station 12. Jesus speaks to his mother and the beloved disciple. John 19:25 through 27. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple there whom he loved, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his home. Though a few loved ones stayed with Jesus till the end, most deserted him. Among the other ways Jesus suffered that day, he also faced loneliness. Jesus imparted final words to those who stood with him. He committed the care of his mother into the hands of one of his followers. In the picture you will see a letter. The letter says, "Before I die, I want you to know." Imagine yourself with only hours to live. Picture writing your own letter. To whom would you want to speak? What would you want or need to say to them? We, your pastors, knew that for some of you this would be the most difficult station. Some of the people in our congregation are lonely. That may include you. Some do not have family or friends. There are many reasons for this. Death, estrangement, life circumstances, and moving away from where friends and family live are some of the reasons people can end up alone. We want you to know that you are not alone. You have God. You also have pastors and a church family that care about you. If you need to talk to a pastor, Eddie and I are available. Our congregational care number is 731-313-0553. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Many ordinary, otherwise healthy people experience depression and other forms of mental illness. Suicide has spiked in the developed world because many people feel so desperate and hopeless. In the case that you have thought about taking your own life, we have provided information for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Life is not without hope, and there are people who are willing to help.
Station 13. Jesus dies on the cross. Luke 23:44 through 46. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, because of an eclipse of the sun. Then the veil of the temple was torn down the middle. Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And when he had said this, he breathed his last. Take a few minutes to ponder the cold, harsh reality of death. No one gets to bypass death. Though Jesus is Son of God and the Lord of life, even he was not exempt from the experience of death.
Station 14. Jesus is placed in the tomb. Matthew 27:57 through 60. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was himself a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be handed over. Taking the body, Joseph wrapped it in clean linen and laid it in the new tomb that he had hewn in the rock. Then he rolled a huge stone across the entrance to the tomb and departed. On the table, you will see a folded shroud. It vaguely resembles the shape of a body. Just to the side of the shroud, you will see a vase representing the perfumes the disciples would apply to Jesus' body as part of the burial ritual. Imagine yourself standing before Jesus' body. Consider the finality of death. Try not to jump ahead to Easter. At the time of Jesus' death, Jesus' loved ones did not know that Easter was coming. For them, this moment marked the end of Jesus' story. His death also meant the death of their hopes and dreams for the future. As you complete the Stations of the Cross, spend the rest of Holy Week considering how empty and meaningless Saturday seemed to Jesus' followers. There is nothing special that marks Holy Saturday. The Church has created no ceremonies, provided no rituals, and spoken no words to fill the spiritual vacuum or to make it easier to navigate. We just have to endure it and move through it. That is what grief is always like. Nothing can fix it. No comforting words can make it hurt less. We do not get over the loss. though healing eventually comes. We cannot speed up the process of grief or exert full control over it. As we anticipate the good news of Easter, we bid you a blessing for the rest of Holy Week.